Escape from captivity has always been worthy of attention, but in world history, there are some truly unique cases that merit admiration. In this episode of Simple Infographic, we'll tell the story of the pilot from the USSR whose legendary escape from a German labor camp not only saved lives, but also helped to establish Soviet rocket science and push the Soviet Union ahead in space exploration. Mikhail Devyatayev's childhood was spent in the countryside. He was the 13th child born into a large Christian family. After completing middle school, Mikhail left his home village of Torbayevo and set off for Kazan. Mikhail went to the city to study. Some sources claim that Devyatayev's main objective was aviation school, although a mix-up with his documents ruined his plans. In the end, the young man did become a student, but only at the Kazan School of River Navigation. Mikhail didn't give up his dream of conquering the skies and joined a local flying club. Mikhail was drafted into the army immediately after his graduation in 1938. At the same time, he studied at the Chikhalov Military Aviation Academy, where he graduated in 1940. The young pilot found himself in the ranks of the active army on the eve of the German invasion of the USSR. He entered service on June 22, 1941, and soon after, on June 24th, during the battle over Minsk, Mikhail Devyatayev shot down his first enemy aircraft. But after a few months, his fate took a sharp turn. An injury received in battle prevented Mikhail from continuing as a fighter pilot. Instead, doctors advised Devyatayev to fly only in low-speed aircraft ranks. Thus, for a long 2.5 years, Mikhail was unable to participate in air battle. First, he served in a night bombing regiment and then became an air ambulance pilot. Fate again smiled upon the pilot in May of 1944. Devyatayev received permission to fly fighter aircraft and was sent to the front. There, Mikhail commanded a branch of the 104th Air Guard Fighter Regiment. By the middle of 1944, he had 9 downed enemy planes on his record and had himself been shot down 4 times. On July 13, 1944, Devyatayev set off on another mission with his group of fighters. The pilots were tasked with repelling a raid by enemy aircraft. Mikhail successfully shot down an enemy plane and continued to do battle. But when the battle moved over Lviv, Devyatayev was hit. His fighter Bell P-39, named Air Cobra, caught fire and began to fall. In the last moments, the pilot abandoned the plane, jumping out with a parachute. Opinions differ on what happened next. According to the official version, during the fall, Mikhail struck the body of the plane and lost consciousness. However, some specialists argue that Mikhail added the part about losing consciousness to the story himself, in order to avoid problems with the authorities. After all, being taken prisoner during wartime could result in punishment or even execution. Devyatayev found himself in captivity. He was aggressively interrogated by German intelligence. They were sure that Mikhail had information on the Soviet Army's strategic plans. But the pilot confidently feigned ignorance of the plans, strategies, and the condition of his army. Soon the Nazis accepted that they would get no meaningful information out of the prisoner. Along with other prisoners, Mikhail was sent to the Litzmannstadt labor camp, or Litzmannstadt ghetto, located in Polish territory in the city of Lodz. Some sources say that before arriving at the Litzmannstadt camp, Devyatayev had spent some time in another Polish camp. There, the most comfortable conditions were provided for him and the other captive commanders. This was done in order to coax the prisoners into joining the Nazis. However, once Mikhail made it known that this was not going to happen, he was immediately transferred to the labor camp. Devyatayev didn't wait around for fate to intervene. Only 1 month after his capture on August 13, 1944, he made an escape attempt. He and a few other prisoners wanted to dig their way out of the camp, but their operation failed. All of the escapees were caught and sentenced to death. For their sentences, Mikhail and his accomplices were sent to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. According to historians, during the war, over 100,000 people died at the camp, located in the German city of Orniberg. But in this place, something happened that can surely be called a miracle. In Sachsenhausen, Devyatayev's life was saved by another of the prisoners, the camp barber. He helped Mikhail change the name patch on his uniform, changing the death row inmate to an ordinary military prisoner named Grigory Nikitenko. The real Nikitenko had died of hunger and disease not long before, but his death had not been recorded. Thanks to the new patch, in October of 1944, Devyatayev was transferred to a third camp. This time, the island of Ust-Dam in the Baltic Sea awaited him. The island is divided between Germany and Poland, but its entire territory was then under the control of the Third Reich. In addition to the Karlshagen concentration camp, the island was also home to the Peenemünde test site. This test site had a special purpose. In 1937, development and secret testing began for the Nazis' new weapons, V-2 ballistic missiles and V-1 cruise missiles. Prisoners from the camp were often used for labor at the testing site. There, they had to deal with the aftermath both of enemy bombings and the testing of the new missiles. They were sent to defuse unexploded bombs and remove debris from equipment and buildings. However, it was this difficult work that would allow Devyatayev to carry out his escape. At the testing site, there were always many German planes. They were used both for combat missions and for testing the V-1 and V-2. In the camp, Devyatayev became close with two other Soviet prisoners, Vladimir Sokolov and Ivan Krivenigov. Both were soldiers of the Red Army and had been captured in the early years of the war. Ending up in the same camp on the island of Ustam, Sokolov and Krivenigov began to plan an escape by boat across the bay, which they told Devyatayev about. However, Mikhail was able to convince his comrades that hijacking a plane for their escape would be a better idea. All three began to gather a small group of trustworthy people with whom they intended to escape. Thorough preparations began in January of 1945. Devyatayev examined the planes, trying to determine the setup of their control systems. Despite his rich experience, he hadn't yet come across a German apparatus. He studied the aircraft equipment, removing parts that were damaged after bombings, and accidentally tried to peek into the cabin where a German pilot was inside. His change of name had come just in time. The Germans took Devyatayev, known to them as Nikitenko, as an ordinary citizen, amazed by the power of their airplanes. They even showed off to the prisoner, turning on and off the engine a few times. Mikhail maintained the facade, meanwhile memorizing the algorithm of their actions. When the plane was ready, the runaways chose a date, February 8, 1945. On that day, Devyatayev and 9 other members of his group were working in close proximity to the airfield. The escape was planned for lunchtime. The prisoners knew that the Germans would never exchange their lunch for work. When the air crew set off for the dining halls, the time had arrived to act. With the help of a piece of rebar, the fugitives eliminated the warden and headed for the planes. Their goal was to take the Heinkel HE-111H-22 bomber. These planes were used for testing the Third Reich's new missiles. The group quickly uncovered the engine, and Devyatayev broke the lock to the cockpit and made his way to the steering wheel, but suddenly their plan was derailed. The plane had no battery. Mikhail communicated this to his comrades. The fugitives began to search the airfield and luckily found a cart containing batteries. The prisoners quickly brought the cart to the plane, inserting the missing element, and climbed into the cabin. However, precious time had been lost, and the Germans noticed the activity on the airfield. Devyatayev steered the bomber to the runway and accelerated, but he couldn't take off. Mikhail couldn't understand why, but there was no escaping it. He'd have to make a second attempt. He turned the plane around, but by that time, the Germans had already gathered on the runway, trying to block the way. Devyatayev pointed the plane right at them. This time, everything went well. The bomber took off into the sky. A red alert was announced at the airfield. The German command immediately gave an order to send a fighter after the plane and shoot it down with anti-aircraft guns. At the helm of the fighter was one of the best pilots of the Third Reich, Günter Hobaum, recipient of several military awards, including Iron Crosses. However, due to dense clouds and the complete unpredictability of the course, detecting the bomber was practically impossible. Devyatayev broke away from his pursuers, but his problems didn't end there. Soon, the bomber encountered another German pilot returning from a mission, Walter Dahl. He received orders right away to shoot down the aircraft and fired his last round of ammunition. Fortunately, Dahl failed to hit the target and he didn't have enough fuel left to pursue the plane. The fugitives had constructed their route according to one map that they had at their disposal. First, Mikhail guided the plane east, but then turned south. There, according to the group's calculations, Soviet troops were located. Having covered nearly 400 kilometers of their journey, the bomber was once again under fire. This time, it was Soviet troops firing from the ground at the plane covered in Nazi symbols. Unable to make himself known, Devyatayev guided the wounded bomber to a field, where he landed it clumsily, but with no casualties. As it turned out, the group had landed not far from the Polish city of Dobegniew. At that time, it was known by the German name of Woldenberg. The 61st Soviet Army was stationed near the city. Soon, the soldiers discovered the plane and the group of escaped prisoners, mistaking them for Germans. The return home was joyous, but not easy. All 10 members of the group were brought to a special NKVD camp to clarify the circumstances of their capture. However, the information the Soviet army got, thanks to the return of Devyatayev's group, managed to convince the military leadership that all 10 could be trusted. Included in that valuable information was the stolen bomber itself. The plane contained the equipment for controlling the V-1 and V-2 rockets. In addition, Mikhail was able to give the command several details of the secret testing grounds on Ustam Island and even orient them to the location of the launch sites of the German missiles. This information helped the Soviet army carry out a decisive attack on the island in March of 1945 and destroyed the enemy missile stations. The members of Devyatayev's group spent around a month in hospital, after which 7 of them were sent back to the front. The 3 remaining officers, Krivenigov, Yemitz, and Devyatayev himself, were discharged to the reserves and didn't see battle for the rest of the war. But Devyatayev's feat wasn't forgotten. In September of 1945, he was summoned by Sergei Korolev. The Soviet academic and designer of space rocket systems was working with the German developments on Ustam Island and hired Devyatayev for consultation. By 1945, Soviet experts had recovered the Germans' V-2 missile, and by 1948 had already tested the first Soviet rocket based on it. By some estimates, this success in rocket science is thanks in large part to Devyatayev's escape. After the war, Mikhail Devyatayev lived a long life. In 1957, he earned the rank of Hero of the Soviet Union, and later, another several state awards. In the years after the war, the pilot wrote 2 books chronicling his legendary escape. In 1972, he released Flight to the Sun, and in 1988, Escape from Hell. Documentaries and artistic films were made about Devyatayev's feat, and in 1975, his home village of Torbeyevo opened a house museum dedicated to him. Mikhail Devyatayev died on November 24, 2002. Before his death, in the summer of 2002, Mikhail visited the site on Ustam Island. There he met with Günter Hobaum, the German fighter pilot who was meant to shoot down Mikhail's stolen bomber in 1945. Devyatayev's feat continues to inspire people today. In March of 2020, Russian director and producer Timur Bekmambetov began filming for his movie V2 Escape from Hell, based on the story of the legendary escape. Mikhail Devyatayev's incredible escape from a Nazi camp makes us realize how much one person can accomplish. What do you think? Does fate rule over people, or can we make our own fate? Write your opinion on this topic in the comments and share this video with your friends. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Simple Infographics so you don't miss out on new, interesting stories.